Okay. So for today, we're going to be starting John chapter 2. And specifically today, I think we're only going to cover the Wedding Feast of Cana. And that will become obvious why it's going to take the entire time as we start getting into it. And basically, I'm going to use this morning as an example of how deep you can dive into the Gospel of John to see all the little things that he's doing in there, all the nuances, all the references. And I'm going to try not to do this in depth with any other section. I'll probably do it with maybe a verse or two here and there, as we continue on throughout the book. But as you will find out with all the intensive stuff that we're going to be doing today, why I'm not going to be doing this with every single passage. This is way too much. Okay. And we'll start with the basics. So before we even get into it, what comes to mind, your mind specifically, with the Wedding Feast of Cana? What's going on?
Ran out of wine.
Ran out of wine.
And it turns the water into wine.
Yeah, ran out, so it turned water into wine.
It was his first miracle.
First miracle. Yeah.
When he does a job, he does it well.
It's a lot of wine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's usually the aspect I find whenever there's teaching materials for this. Is like, hey kids, visualize this much wine. Woo.
How many guests were at that? It might have been a lot of guests.
Could have been a lot of guests. We don't know, but a Jewish type of wedding at this point in time, you probably would have invited near the entire village.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
a few dozen people at least. Because when you're today, when you're inviting people for a wedding, well, you're inviting the family, the extended family, the friends. Well, that just happened to be the size of the village back then, pretty much. So you're inviting the village. Okay, so I have a few things that we think of when we're thinking of the Wedding Feast of Cana. A couple of things that I thought people were going to say is that he was fulfilling his mother's request, if that was in there, and also save the best for last, because usually.
Yeah, that's what he does it well.
Usually people quote that line. So now we're going to be looking into, well, what is John the evangelist, the guy who's writing the book? What is he using this for? And as you're talking about turning water into wine, the first miracle, all this stuff. Well, yeah, that's the surface theological level to read this, that it's showcasing Jesus' divine power. And like at the end of all this, verse 11, John makes the comment, and his glory was revealed at Cana, basically. But if you dig down even a little bit deeper than that, well, maybe not even dig down, but just kind of view it in its historical context. John the Evangelist might also have been using this to combat an early heresy known as Gnosticism. Gnosticism is basically a hyper spiritualization, saying, oh, all the physical material stuff, that's bad. We don't want to be here. We just want to be abstract and spiritual. It's all we want. So they deny that physical reality is good. God didn't want to create the physical reality. The closer you get to God, the more spiritual you are, the more abstracted you are from physical reality. Gnosticism also likes a whole bunch of secret knowledge, but the main point is physical bad, spiritual good. But what does John do for the first miracle? He showcases how Jesus turns water into wine to keep the party going. Woo. So And I was reading the commentary a little bit. One of the early church fathers in the 3rd century made the comment that a heresy that was built on Gnosticism, Marcionites, they had explicit comments, well, John the Evangelist must be lying about this because, of course, Jesus couldn't do this. He couldn't be doing something that glorified the physical. Like, no, that can't happen. So yeah, John was probably combating an early heresy. He almost explicitly mentions this in 1 John, where he's talking about those who deny that Jesus Christ came in the flesh are not of God. And that's basically what Gnostics would try to do, is they try to make everything very spiritual. There's also another early heresy called Gnosticism, which literally means seems likeism, where it's Jesus only seemed to have a physical body. Really, he was just a divine spirit, and that was all he was. So, yeah, reading this on a historical level, we can also see why John is trying to elevate the physical, try to bring that into it. And that's a lot of what John's gospel is about God, the divine coming down to dwell in the world. But what I'm going to be focusing on mainly for this morning is the deeper theological level, which is portraying the crucifixion and hinting at the resurrection. The resurrection comes in the second half of chapter 2 with Jesus cleansing the temple. But the Wedding Feast of Cana, it's really going to hammer home on the crucifixion, the importance of the crucifixion at the onset of Christ's ministry. So his entire ministry is actually built on the idea that he's going to be crucified. But how can we say that? One of the reasons why John would bring this up here, I'm going off of my notes. There are 6 pages of notes here, so I didn't print this off for everybody. I don't know if anybody would be that interested reading 6 pages of notes. But as I mentioned before, John uses the chiastic style, so an X-like style. When this is actually working in a story, you find kind of the highlight in the middle, and then you have the beginning, beginning and an end point. As we'll also find out looking at this passage, John also uses a linear style, actually 2 linear styles. And he's building things up in the first half of his gospel, and then building things up in the second half of the gospel. This is the resurrection of Lazarus, triumphal entry, crucifixion and resurrection. So this also corresponds with this. These events correspond here, these events correspond here. When you combine these 2 styles to make it even more complicated, what you eventually end up is with this. And then everything on these levels correspond with each other. Everything on this level corresponds with each other. This corresponds with each other. Then you have these. I'm trying not to make it like this. So I'll stick mostly with a very simplified chiastic model. Okay. So we have the climax. Here, this is Lazarus. So John chapter 11. Just so you know where the midpoint is. Okay. So why, structurally speaking, would we say that this corresponds to the crucifixion and the resurrection? Well, here at the beginning, if you don't count the prologue as part of the structure, you have John the Baptist and proclaiming, I'm not the Christ. And he's pointing forward to the Christ. Like, look to the Christ, don't look at me, look to the Christ. what do we have at the end here? And we're also not going to be counting John chapter 21 because that's an epilogue. The prologue, John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. Epilogue at John chapter 21. That's just kind of going through the resolving the stories of some of the disciples. So if we look to the real close of the gospel, it's John's message. These things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing you have life in his name. These two actually connect, is that John the Baptist is trying to proclaim, well, who is really giving you life? And then at the close, John the Evangelist is saying, Jesus is the one who really gives you life. So John is pointing forward to the Christ. John the Baptist is pointing forward to the Christ. John the Evangelist is pointing back to the Christ. Then you get to the next step up. Well, what's the next step up? Well, we have the first disciples. So this is Andrew and John. Andrew and John. And then they're bringing in Peter. And what's going on here? Here, we're actually seeing Jesus appearing to the disciples after the resurrection. So the disciples are coming to Jesus based on the testimony of John the Baptist. And now Jesus is appearing to the disciples, so the kind of reverse. So the disciples are going to Jesus here. Jesus is going to the disciples here. They're basing themselves on this witness. Jesus is coming to the disciples so they can make a new witness. And then these pieces correspond to each other. You can even go a little bit beyond this. We're kind of interlinked with this circle. You have doubting Nathaniel and doubting Thomas. Nathaniel, what can anything good come from Nazareth? And then Thomas, like, unless I see it with my own eyes and touch his side, I won't believe. So doubting Thomas, doubting Nathaniel. Doubting Nathaniel, doubting Thomas. So when you get further up to the resurrection, crucifixion bit, this is all of John chapter 2. This is John chapter 19 and a little bit of 20. The first few verses, a little bit. I want to say to 7, but I can't remember. I should have written it down. Basically, John chapter 2 corresponds with John chapter 19. Or at least the end of John chapter 19. John chapter 19 goes off further. So that's what. So we can even see with the structure that these are corresponding with each other. The cleansing of the temple is actually more about the resurrection than it is the crucifixion. The wedding at Cana is more about the crucifixion than it is the resurrection. But you can kind of see elements in both, a little bit, not as much. Okay. Any questions before we go on?
Well, you mentioned agnostics and Gnostics, but I didn't catch the third category.
Oh, no, I don't think I talked about agnostics.
But
There were Gnostics, and there was Marcionites who were kind of coming out of that. I didn't explain who they were, but it would take a bit.
that's another word that started like Gnostics. So. Yeah. No, maybe. Not important. Keep going.
Okay.
It's the mask.
I think so.
Yeah.
So Gnostics, physical, bad, spiritual, good, need secret knowledge. That's what Gnostic means, knowledge. Marcionites, they're a dualist, but they're an odd type of dualist, where they basically say God of the Old Testament, bad, God of the New Testament, good. So don't pay attention to God the Father in the Old Testament, he's full of wrath. pay attention only to Jesus because he gives you grace. And anybody worth their salt knows, like, who's read the Bible can tell you, no, that's not right. But that's why they also took out books of the Bible. Yeah. So Marcionite's not good. Oh, Docetists. That was the other group. Docetists are the ones who say seems like, so Jesus only seemed like he had a physical body. He was really just divine and spiritual. Yeah, that one came on really early on. That was, I think, first half of the 2nd century. So I think it was right after the Gospels were written, pretty much. Okay. So what we're going to do now, share my screen, there we go. What we're going to do now is we're going to read through the whole Wedding Feast of Cana. So John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. And then I'll kind of ask for a little bit of feedback, what you think about it, and we'll go specific point by point kind of through what's going on. Since it is 11 verses, maybe 2 people reading, 1 person, I don't know. Who feels adventurous?
Oh.
Okay.
On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, his mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the disciples, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet."
They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This was the first of the miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him.
Oh. Any thoughts?
Well, Pastor, I'm sure I have, read this many times, but after what you introduced at the beginning, I understand it a little bit different, I think, possibly, where when Jesus responds to his mother, "My hour has not yet come." I never really got that before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'll be getting to that too. Yeah, it's a major piece of foreshadowing.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
A major piece of foreshadowing.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
right.
That is a lot of wine. 6 jars, each holding 20 to 30 gallons.
Mm.
I
But
think
apparently they didn't have just one day of celebration. They had
Yeah, it was pretty much a week.
a week, of celebrations.
Yeah.
And
And you
besides, they get them drunk, so they can give them cheap wine.
Yeah, and this is also for like the entire village, so you need a lot. Oh, and they also don't drink water at this time.
So that would have impressed the whole village, wouldn't have it?
they knew.
Yeah. Well, they definitely knew, because this was because the host, the master of the feast, this would have been the bridegroom's father, more often than not. So I think it could change slightly, but it would be the bridegroom's father in celebration of his son getting the wife, and then also because this is now creating a marriage relationship so that the son can have another son and the inheritance can continue. So at this time, when having an heir is such a big deal, you want to make sure that your family line continues. So if your son gets married and can produce children now, you're like, woohoo! My life has meaning because my children's children will have good things. So it was a big hullabaloo, and it was an expected custom. But I guess a social factor that we don't often think of at this time is this is a virtue-based moral system, an honor-based system. We don't have as much honor, dishonor governing everything we do. We do have some of it today. I mean, you won't go to a sketchy neighborhood to try and get all your groceries. You want to go to the good stores, the nice places. But at this point in time, honor was everything. You had to go and maintain your honor. You did virtuous tasks also to retain your reputation within the society, to build it up, to make sure people look to you well. The honor-based system of society was falling out right around the Industrial Revolution, I'd say, actually. And then we became more wealth-based for who we saw where. But honor was the primary currency of society for quite some time. Quite recently, actually, I listened to a podcast. There was somebody writing an essay in a collection of essays where he was looking at the book of Romans, and he wasn't looking at it specifically through a law gospel lens. Like he's a Lutheran pastor, so of course he recognizes that that's in there. But when you look at the book of Romans and you're seeing, well, what's law, what's grace? Well, the number of times it's talking about law and grace, it's actually smaller than the amount of times the book of Romans talks about honor and dishonor and reputation and other stuff. You don't really notice it because you're looking at the other stuff. But yeah, it's in there. It's that you have to maintain honor, and God himself, all great honor is due to him. You actually even see that here with, well, how is honor maintained? Well, having the host who maintains a good party. And even at verse 11, when Jesus reveals his glory, the glory is the honor of God. So Jesus, in doing this miracle, has honor in the society. But perhaps that's a bit of a diversion, though.
I have a question, Pastor. Why would Jesus say, "My hour has not yet come"?
Oh, we're going to get into that in a moment.
Okay, it just bothered me.
Okay.
Foreshadowing.
Any other?
Well, I thought it was always interesting or interesting that his mother, after he makes that reply, just tells the servants, do whatever he tells you. So has she maybe witnessed in her life his divinity by things that he's done at home?
Well, an angel did come and say that he would be the Messiah, so.
Right.
So Mary, mother, was probably the greatest believer at this point in time. We don't know if she had like an entirely full view of what the Messiah, like who the Messiah would be specifically. Like she would definitely have an idea that this is not just a human being, but also God in the flesh, because the Holy Spirit was the one who impregnated her. But
My notes say that Mary wasn't expecting a miracle, that she was just used to asking him to do things because Joseph apparently was probably dead by now.
possibly, we don't know what happened to Joseph, so he might have been dead at this time. Hard to say. But with Mary, she definitely knew there was something special about her child, definitely knew this was someone somewhat divine, but I don't think she fully knew what would happen until the crucifixion and resurrection. I don't think she had the fullest idea until that time, but she definitely probably had, probably. 99% accurate.
I have a,
I would say that she would have a better idea than a lot of the disciples who he was.
I have a question, Pastor. Why do they say in the very first of this chapter, on the third day?
Ooh, we're also going to be getting to that.
So is that the third day of him being officially going into his ministry? Is that what that means?
Not quite.
Okay.
Okay.
Third day of the week or third day of the wedding party.
Well, let's actually just get into it, the whole thing, because we've had a couple people point out a couple things.
Okay.
So let's get into the whole mess. So first things up.
Pastor, I would love to have a copy of your 6-page of notes. Okay, you can put it in my mailbox or email it to me. I would love to see them, but go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So let's just get into the whole thing. On the third day. So at the very beginning, John is prefacing this with, well, something very distinctive. Something that we probably just glossed over. I know I did, because back before I was researching this, actually just yesterday, I didn't see as much importance as it actually is in there. That's also why it's very helpful to read a commentary or some other resource now and again to try and deepen your insight. So on the third day, when is the third day? Well, this is actually the third day since the prior events. So I don't know if any of us.
Since what?
The prior events.
Oh, okay.
In John chapter 1. So I don't know if you noticed in John chapter 1, but as we were going through it, the sections are actually broken by the phrase the next day. So that comes up in verses 29, 35, 43, John chapter 1. So the next day, John sees Jesus and says, I already baptized that guy. So that would be the first day after that. The next day after that, John points to Jesus and tells two of his disciples, Andrew and John, hey, there's that guy who I baptized, the Lamb who's going to save the world. And then the day after that, you have Philip and Nathaniel that Jesus decided to leave there and beckons to Philip, follow me. Then Philip in turn grabs Nathaniel, and there's a divine witness there. So the third day of this particular sequence, Philip and Nathaniel, what does Jesus do at the very close? Verse 51. He says, actually, I'll go a little bit before that. So Jesus tells Nathaniel, I saw you underneath the fig tree, and Jesus had no way of knowing that. Nathaniel recognizes this as important. And then he has his declaration, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. Recognizing this guy to be the Messiah because he's using a divine attribute, omnipotence. Jesus knows something that he should not be able to know. And then Jesus in response says, well, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You shall see greater things than that. He then added,
Very next day.
I tell you, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the sons of man. Here already we see a hint at the crucifixion resurrection. So, heaven opens. When does that actually happen? That happens at the cross. Jesus gives up his spirit, it goes to the Father in heaven, and because Jesus' spirit goes to the Father in heaven, the way to heaven is opened up for us. angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. The only time you really see angels in the Gospel of John is at the empty tomb. Two angels speak to Mary Magdalene that, are you weeping? He's not here. And then she turns and sees Christ. So when you see angels descending to be with the Son of Man, you see it at the resurrection. Heaven opens with the crucifixion, and the angels descend, and will ascend, of course, with the resurrection. So Jesus already at that time, on the third day of the sequence, is predicting his resurrection.
So when Jesus descended or rose to heaven,
Yeah.
was his body still in the grave?
Oh, yes.
So his body only left the grave after he came back to earth,
Yes.
after his spirit came back to earth.
Yeah.
So physically, he did not go to heaven.
Physically, not at this time. He physically rose to heaven in the ascension 40 days after the resurrection. But for the period in between the crucifixion and the resurrection, he was dead in the tomb. And
But his body didn't decay.
no, it didn't have time to. But it's important that his body remained in the tomb, because if his body went up to heaven, then that means his body would be alive. He wouldn't have died. And if he didn't die, then he would not have received the punishment for our sins. So for a body to enter into heaven, God is not a God of the dead, but a God of the living. If a body ascends into heaven, it is alive. So for Jesus to be dead in the tomb, that's important. Otherwise, we would ourselves, all the people who have deceased bodies now, they would be unlike Christ at that time. But Jesus has to make himself like us in every way, including putting himself under death, so that our death can actually end in resurrection, like Jesus' death ended in resurrection.
And when he died on the cross, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit.
Hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does. I don't know, in my head, I always just visualized him not being in that grave.
Oh.
That he,
Oh yeah. Well, it's also a recognition of the Sabbath, and I mean like the Old Testament Sabbath, with being on the Saturday. Died on the Friday. On the Saturday, he rested in the tomb still. And then on Sunday, then he rose again to newness of life, in a new creation. So it's fulfilling the law and also making sure that he is like us in every way, and making sure that he undergoes the same punishment we experience. So that, like him, we can enter into glory. Actually, yeah, similar to the ascension, but not quite. We would actually go into heaven like him. We won't descend from the earth and go into spiritual realms in our physical flesh, but rather God brings heaven down here as he recreates heavens and earth. Yeah, so on the third day, Jesus points to his resurrection. And yeah, on the third day, he rose in the resurrection. So of course, on the third day, yes, he predicted resurrection. But then, like the standard creation narrative in Genesis, you have two sets of three. So in Genesis, you have creation of light, creation of, or rather the expanse, the sky, dividing the heavens above from the waters beneath. Then the land on the third day with vegetation. And then you have the next set of three, which is, you already have light, but now you have light bodies, the sun, moon, and the stars. Fifth day, you have the sky, you have the waters, but now you have a filling of the sky and the waters with birds and fish. Sixth day, you have the earth, now you need a filling of the earth with various land animals. So with the creation sequence kind of being broken off into two groups of three, well, John does the same thing. you have 1, 2, 3 days in John chapter 1, and then chapter 2 just begins on the third day. So this is all on the third day, kind of hinting at 3 days in the tomb, 3 days to the resurrection. It's also the 6th day of the sequence. And the 6th day, on the 6th day, Jesus died on the cross, the Friday. So when John is saying on the third day, in conjunction with John chapter 1, he's hinting at the resurrection explicitly with the 3 days. And then he's also hinting at the crucifixion because this is the 6th day in the sequence. Jesus died on the 6th day and rested in the tomb on the Sabbath. In fact, that's why the 2 prisoners on either side of Jesus, their legs were broken so that they would die faster, so they would not have dead bodies remain there for a Sabbath. So, yeah, the Sabbath, there is not allowed to be any unclean thing, including a dead body in that around the people. So yes, already on the third day, John the Evangelist, the guy who's writing the book, is hinting at not only the resurrection, but also the crucifixion. When I was actually looking at this, I thought, well, what does John use the word day for? And I found that John uses the word day less frequently than the other gospel writers. Oh, that's kind of interesting. And John really doesn't use it generically often, like today I will do this. John doesn't do that as often as you might expect. More frequently, he uses the word day to refer to the last day, the day of judgment. But even though it's the last day, the day of judgment, on the last day, Jesus also explicitly references the resurrection. In fact, that comes up 5 times that the word day in conjunction with the resurrection. Mostly in John chapter 6. But yeah, even just using the word day, he's kind of referencing more resurrection, last day type of idea. In John chapter 1, where it says the next day, that's a different word in Greek, which I quickly discovered. And so yeah, the next day, just referring to a regular old day, nothing entirely special. John uses a different word than the third day, which is referencing more, I'll point forward to the resurrection, crucifixion, and also the last day with the resurrection for all people. It's interesting.
So are you saying that instead of saying on the next day at the beginning of chapter 2, mentioning that it was on the third day had more significance?
Yes.
Okay.
So the next day, the power on the third day, let's see, Damaris Tritus. So you have different words for these things. So John is kind of drawing more attention to the third day than he was to the previous day. Okay, that is point 1. A wedding. So generically, a wedding, celebration of man and woman uniting together in one flesh, a joining together of life, as we see in the Old Testament. That's what marriage is supposed to be. They're coming together, 2 lives now make one. A very joyous occasion. This is also why in the Old Testament, especially with some of the prophets, you find marital language is often used of God with his people. God's bride is the nation of Israel. He is the one who prepares his bride for marriage so that they can go into the wedding feast and be in the promised land, the land of wealth, the land of plenty, and enjoy the wealth of this feast forevermore. That's the idea. However, you'll also find more language, than the wedding, but more language about basically how the bride of God, Israel, has gone astray. In fact, idolatry, the language and figurative language around idolatry is very frequently used or themed as adultery. Ezekiel chapter 16, if you ever want to go through it, it's a very long chapter. It's about how God finds this child on his way. He takes her in, raises her, she becomes his bride. Then he continues to look after her, care for her, give her everything. And then she plays the whore and continues to have relations with everybody besides God, and isn't even a proper whore because she pays them for her sexual favors rather than receiving payment for sexual favors. And that's basically a figurative way to talk about how Israel has departed in faith from God and places faith in other nations and material wealth and material gain. But you'll find, yes, idolatry and adultery mixing figurative language all the time in the Old Testament, because God, his bride is his church, his people. This is the letter of 1 Corinthians. It's about unity, it's about love, it's about joining together. And when you find some of the stuff that's going wrong in the Corinthian church at that time, it's wrong in terms of sexuality or idolatry. And Paul just kind of joins the two in a continuous thread, showing how these are related. You are taking the love meant for this one person and putting it where it does not belong. Yeah. So God has always kind of had this language in his scriptures about being united in marriage with his people. Specifically John now, as a writer of scripture. He doesn't really mention it too much in his gospel, nor does he talk about it in his letters, but in the book of Revelation, this does come in. In Revelation chapter 19, verses 1 to 9, there is a wedding feast celebrating the destruction of Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great is symbolic for the corruption of the earth, the evil empires that are trying to assuage people over to their side and away from God. So Babylon the Great has fallen, and now the true groom can be with his people and celebrate his marriage. And the celebration is the Lamb, who is Jesus Christ, joining together with his bride, the heavenly city of Jerusalem, or the church. And shortly afterwards, in the narrative in Revelation, Satan is then bound for 1,000 years to be let loose at the end of the world for a short time. So looking at this from a Lutheran lens, we can see that the wedding event actually takes place at the crucifixion and resurrection, because Satan is bound because of the cross. Because of Jesus' victory over him, he has no effective power anymore. He still has his power within the world, but he has no power over Christians, so he's bound. Think of him as being on a leash. He has control over those who are not in the church, but in the church, he has absolutely no power, because we are God's. So the wedding feast comes about, or at least begins, with the crucifixion, but it comes into its fullness when the bride comes out of heaven. That is, the heavenly city of Jerusalem comes out of heaven, Revelation chapter 21, and now dwells upon the earth. So it's a now and not yet type of thing. Experiencing now, but it's not yet fully fulfilled. You can kind of see this with Jesus' statement, my hour has not yet come. So at this wedding feast, where somebody's hour has come, that there's now celebrating their nuptials, they're now joining together as one flesh with someone in a relationship. Jesus states, my time has not yet come. The event of the wedding The event of his victory has not yet come about. And this, and John the Baptist also hints a little bit at this when in last chapter, John chapter 1, John the Baptist pointed Jesus and says, the coming of the Lamb. So he's pointing at the Lamb for salvation. John is kind of hinting at the Lamb for the wedding feast of the Lamb, of which we get a foretaste of the feast of God. Third little point there. We're still in the first verse. Cana. Where do you think Cana comes up elsewhere in Scripture? Or have you heard of it elsewhere in Scripture?
Is that where the word Canaanite come from?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what word did you say? Did you say kingdom?
Cana.
Oh,
Canaan.
Canaan.
Cana.
Canaan.
It's a village.
Mm-hmm.
Was it close to Nazareth
It's in the
geographically?
still reasonably close.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're having trouble thinking of another time it comes up, that gives you a hint.
Did you say that again?
If it's giving you trouble to think of a time Cana comes up again, that gives you a hint. But this has not come up often.
Right.
Cana, the village of Cana, is mentioned 4 times in Scripture. Like the word comes up 4 times in all of the New Testament. All of them in the Gospel of John. Twice in this passage, once in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the woman at the well, and it's just saying he was near Cana where he performed this miracle. So that's still talking about the same event. The last time comes up John chapter 21 verse 2, mentioning that Nathanael is from Cana. That's his hometown. So it also makes sense that Nathanael, the guy who shows up at the end of John chapter 1, we go to his hometown beginning of John chapter 2. But it's mentioned in John chapter 4 that I was near Cana where he performed this miracle, because that introduces the second miracle Jesus does. There are 7 miracles that are performed in the first half of John, Gospel of John. The first one's at Cana. The second one is near Cana. Actually, still in Cana, I guess you could technically say. Somebody's in Capernaum, so this is geographically separate. You would take probably a half day or a day to get there. Somebody comes up to Jesus, can you heal somebody? And Jesus says, go. He's healed. So Jesus healed somebody in Capernaum from Cana. And this demonstrates that his salvation, the salvation that he offers, although localized in his person, and you can actually come to him in person and ask for this, it's not spatially bound. And I think that's a nice little way to think of the crucifixion, is that if the crucifixion is located at a specific point in history, a specific location, a specific time, but the salvation that Jesus offers is not bound to a particular place and time. You don't have to find him physically to actually receive this. It can actually be done at a great distance. And I think that's why you have the second miracle kind of showing an outgrowth from Cana. But when we also have an outgrowth from Cana, we realize, well, this is the first miracle that kind of sets the tone for all miracles coming afterwards. So if we have the second miracle being done from Cana, but in somewhere else, then this is of a great importance and now propagating out. So we're kind of seeing Cana elevated, even though it comes up the word comes up 4 times. Also interesting that it's associated with Nathanael, of course, because Jesus was predicted his death and resurrection to Nathanael just before this. So, yeah, it's kind of just drawing everything in towards death and resurrection. Okay. Jesus' mother. Mary only appears twice in the Gospel of John.
Really?
I'm trying to think how many times she appears in Mark. I remember she appears once, but I can't think of any other time. So Mark actually might have fewer references to her. Matthew and Luke, they have more references to Mary because she's part of the narrative for Jesus' birth. Mark doesn't mention her much because he doesn't have a narrative for Jesus' birth. But for John, yeah, he only brings up Mary twice. The first time is here at the Wedding Feast of Cana. And if this is at the Wedding Feast of Cana, where do you think she appears again?
At the crucifixion?
Yeah. She comes up, John chapter 19, verses 25 to 27. She's standing with the disciple Jesus loved, John, the guy who's writing this book. And Jesus says to John, look, this is your mother. And then he looks to Mary, look, this is your son. So Mary's presence is also kind of hinting that this is pointing to the crucifixion. But we also have an interesting relation between Mary and John. John is never names himself in the gospel. He doesn't draw attention to himself, he doesn't want attention. Also interesting, Mary is never given a name. She's always referred to as Jesus' mother in the Gospel of John. John is intentionally trying to downplay her importance in relation to Jesus because she's not the focus. John, as the writer of the Gospel, he knows he's not the focus, so he doesn't try to make himself the focus by even giving himself a name. So when Jesus' mother and John, the disciple Jesus loved, whenever they come up, they're not going to be the important part. Jesus is going to be the important part. So even though Mary is playing a very instrumental role here in chapter 2, she's not meant to be the focus. You even find that when Jesus addresses her, woman, and the NIV on my screen that the people online are viewing, it just says woman, and quite rightly so. For the NIV 1984 that we're looking at in text here in this room, it says dear woman. The dear is going a little bit too far. It's a generic term of address. It's just basically saying hello there, or how are you? But kind of the generic, to whom it may concern almost, but being more specific.
It's always struck me as almost disrespectful.
I know, that's what I was expecting somebody to say. Today, it would seem disrespectful to just say, hey, woman. Then you expect something kind of, I don't know.
Mom.
Oh, I was going to say,
It almost, if my son said that to me, I would feel like he was putting me down.
I know, because I feel like if you say, hey, woman, or woman in today's culture, I think it's going to be followed by something almost insulting, like, woman, make me a sandwich, that type of insulting. But for this time period, like, that was just a generic term of address. We actually find Jesus addressing the woman at well with the same term. So woman at the well, he's talking to a woman, and she's actually, the woman at the well is kind of interested because here's this Jew, and Jews don't have relations with Samaritans, and she's like, you're talking to me like this is an everyday thing? What's up with that? And she's not insulted. Jesus is not meaning to insult her. She's actually just confused about not a familiarity, but common decency that he's putting forward. I would compare it to, or at least kind of the foil to it is if I address somebody as hey guy or a guy, that generic, that's not insulting, that's not necessarily endearing either. It's just what it is, guy. Yeah, neutral. Okay. Well, that's changed quite a bit actually, because the word guy came into the English language from a name, Guy Fawkes.
Really?
Yes. So the gunpowder plot that sought to destroy Parliament was orchestrated in a major way by Guy Fawkes. When people were using the term guy, that was meaning somebody who was uncouth, somebody who was a jerk, somebody who they could associate with this guy who was executed by the state for treason. But today, if I use the word guy, look, it doesn't mean anything at all. It's fine. So kind of think of it as the reverse of how we're using woman. Woman, if I talk to somebody today and say, hey, woman, or if that's going to be insulting. But back then, no. So it just changed.
Well, same way as the word gay has changed.
I think it's a slightly different thing.
I know, but it's the idea of the change of meaning.
Yeah, words change.
Yeah.
I was trying to intentionally not use that one. Because that one morphed in a very different way.
When you say God, I think of Kiva Point and Kiva Fleur.
Okay.
So that's, they're spelled like guy would be pronounced in English.
Yeah. Well, that was Guy Fawkes' name, because his name was French, and then you just go with the English pronunciation, which is Guy. But after Guy Fawkes, nobody really wanted to be called Guy. Kind of like after Hitler, nobody wants to be called Adolf. But Adolf was a very popular name until World War II. Just saying.
Pastor, am I correct in thinking that it sounds to me like Christ is rebuking his mother?
Nope. That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
This is a very neutral term of address. Like if I went out and said guy to somebody today.
Okay.
So like, hey Mel, hi guy. Yeah, it's just generic. I don't mean anything. I'm not trying to use it as a term of endearment, nor am I trying to use it as a term of insult. It's just there.
But I'm referring to the statement of why do you involve me?
Oh, apparently that I was trying to avoid that one. Apparently, that is a Greek rendering of a Hebrew term, and according to the commentaries reading, it's absolutely terrible to try and translate that correctly. But it's an idiom, and it's hard to translate these well.
Okay.
So it's kind of how do I? It's also a neutral thing. It's fairly neutral. It's just, oh, you're talking to me? What? Why are you talking to me?
Okay.
Yeah.
In relating a story, I would say to Lynn, well, this guy came to me and asked for direction.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Rather than the-
Yeah, it does
too
mean
much
that.
story.
It's not this lady came to me, this guy.
Yeah.
To identify this with that appearance.
I know. Yeah. Just
So in other words, Jesus didn't say to his mother, Mom.
No, and that's also kind of downplaying the relationship a little bit, because again, the focus is not Jesus' relation to her, the focus is on Jesus' actions. So John is, as writers, trying to portray what's going on and who's the primary focus.
Okay, Mom Jesus made, is it when he was 12 in the temple, and when his parents were looking for him? And
Yeah.
it was a little bit of a put down there too. You know, was she not that I'm about my father's business or something like that, he said?
Did you not know that I would be in my father's house? And I'm not entirely sure Mary had the high ground there, because she went a day without realizing what her son was. So it seems that she and Joseph failed as parents, as much as you could even try to claim that Jesus failed as a son. But I think Jesus is more referring to there, because they were searching for him for days, a couple days. And one of the last places they thought to look would be the temple. And Jesus was trying to say, well, why didn't you check here first? Again, Mary had an angel tell her, this is the Son of God. So wouldn't you look to where God would be, if considering his parents? But I digress. Oh, yeah, so going back to my notes, I'll also mention that intentionally not naming Jesus' mother, and she's very well known in the early church. Like, I was reading a couple of the early church fathers who were living in the first century, and they make mention of her because she's still alive at the time. So they know her, they know exactly where her house is, they know her name, love her to death. It was very odd that John, who would have had an intimate relation with her, who also took her into his home, would not mention her. John also names people that the other gospel writers do not name. When St. Peter cut off Malchus's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane, John is the only one who mentions their names. If you look at the other three gospels, they don't mention names. This might actually be because John was written later, after the heat died down, for trying to get Peter for cutting off this guy's ear. But for John to mention names that nobody else mentions, also not many people mention Mary Magdalene being the one who first saw Jesus out of the tomb. The other writers usually just say the women. But John is tying a lot of attention to certain individuals within the church, probably to say, well, this is so-and-so's testimony. But for himself and Jesus' mother, he's really trying to downplay this. And I think we see the problem why, the problem he was trying to avoid when he actually looked to Roman Catholicism and what they try to do. So two of the passages that Roman Catholics use to try to elevate Mary as high as they possibly can within their theology are the two passages in John. The two passages that John intentionally does not name her. And I'll very briefly explain that. So Mary asking Jesus to assist the host of the wedding. From this, Roman Catholicism concludes, therefore, we should pray to Mary to ask Jesus to forgive our sins and save us, because he cannot refuse his mother. The mother has a better relationship with her son and can force him to forgive you at any point in time. So they're trying to elevate her really high up there. The second one, where at the crucifixion, Jesus tells John, take her into her home, or to tell John, this is your mother. Well, they kind of gloss over the fact where he also tells Mary, this is your son. They just kind of gloss over that, and they just focus on, this is your mother. And they say, therefore, all believers in Christ, not just John, but every single last believer, must look to Mary as the Holy Mother and devote themselves to her, as if she was their Holy Mother. Kind of like, yeah, those two things, those are huge jumps in logics. Especially since John is trying to downplay these things. I've even heard Catholic apologists say that, oh, you're using the term woman? That means that is a high elevated term that it must mean that he loves her more than any other woman. You're like, no, he addressed the Samaritan woman at the well the exact same way. It's all references at the time say that this is a neutral term of address. So
It was also a term of
John is
respect.
intentionally trying to downplay this to avoid some of the mistakes that have come up that Roman Catholicism has adopted. Right.
But Jesus also used the word woman as a respectful term.
How do you mean?
Well, women were sort of sometimes considered second-class citizens, but Jesus always referred to women with terms of respect. Just
Well,
like he referred to children with words of respect when disciples tried to take the kids away from him. I think he was setting an example of how to treat everyone.
And I think he does that more so just because of the neutrality which he addresses her. He does not rebuke her, he just addresses her as woman. So again, it's a neutral term for the day. It's not one of endearment or disrespect, it's just there. Again, it's like God. I'm not being I'm not being terribly respectful, nor am I being disrespectful. I'm just kind of addressing you as you are a guy in front of me.
Okay.
That's the force of the word.
In John 2, both references are written as dear woman.
I know, and I think the NIV is making too much out of this. It really is. And that's why in the NIV that I'm looking at on the screen here, it just says woman. That 1984,
Verse 4.
verse 4. Yeah, so you're using the ESV, so I don't think it doesn't.
woman in
It
mind.
says dear woman too.
Yeah, so the NIV is the 1984 NIV is trying to elevate it when it has
Mine doesn't say dear.
no historical ground to do so. So yeah, the ESV is correct on this one. It's just saying woman. Okay.
Sounds better if he says dear woman, if it's his mom. Than woman.
I know, but he's trying to be neutral here to try and say that she's not of greater importance than anyone else.
Pastor, I was just thinking about the confidence that Jesus' mother had, because when he made that response to her, all she did was turn around and say to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Like she had confidence that he would do something.
Okay.
Without the dear, it comes across quite differently.
So she didn't feel that she was, I don't think she felt disrespected,
No, she didn't.
right?
Right.
How do you
Okay.
know? How do you know?
Because she didn't get offended. That's kind of how I know. So no more. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Now, that's a big difference to me. Dear woman or just plain woman.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say is that people are making a mountain out of a molehill either way. If they're saying that is in terms of endearment or not. It's not, it's just a neutral term.
And it's also a translation from Greek too.
Well,
Number one, he
or
could
maybe Greek of the 1st century, so that's a specific type of Greek. So again, if words change over time, then you could theoretically get a different understanding of a word. That's what happened with baptism, because baptism, before the writing of the Bible, like if you go to classical Greek, that's a kind of an immersion, a washing by immersion. By the time of the Bible, it doesn't mean that anymore. It just means to wash, kind of a generic washing. And then you get into a whole bunch of conflicts with Baptists who say, oh, you have to be immersed in order to be baptizing. Well, you're using a classical Greek dictionary instead of a Koine Greek dictionary, so that's why you're having this difficulty.
I wouldn't be surprised if they put the beer in there to soften it. Because as mothers, we read that and kind of go.
Yeah, I'm pretty
you
sure
know,
that's why.
You know, if our kids.
I'm pretty sure that's why they did it.
We wouldn't be too happy, but when you explain what the norm was at the time on how to speak to each other,
Yeah,
then
Well, you wonder also why didn't he say mother? Why would you involve me? Instead of saying woman, why wouldn't he say mother when it was his mother?
because he's intentionally trying to downplay the role that this is just a generic request. He's not doing it because she's his mother. He's just doing it. Because again, since this is a foil for the crucifixion, Jesus is not crucifying himself because his mom told him to. He's doing it to fulfill the will of the Father in heaven. So this is a divine plan, not a human plan. The same thing with the miracles. It's not on the basis of the people involved that these things are coming about, but God's will for them. So when you see a whole bunch of people come up to Jesus, please heal me from this, please heal this person for that, Jesus is rightly giving to them what is due by faith. He is not saying like, oh, you're my cousin, of course I'm going to heal you. He's going, oh, you have great faith, by your faith you were healed. So there's a distinction between, so John is trying to make a distinction between personal relationships and relationships of faith. Who's really the children of God?
So, Pastor, it's obvious that Jesus' mother had great faith in that he would be able to do something.
Yep.
And or she would never have said to him, oh, hey, they have no more wine. And she comes to Jesus to tell him that, right?
Yeah.
And then
right? Told her she would have the Son of God. So.
Right. And then when he just says, well, why do you involve me? My hour is not yet come. She just turned around and said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. She was fully confident that
he may have witnessed miracles that we don't know about.
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
John pretty much says so at the end of his book. He says like these things are in that you may believe, and then right before that he says if all the events of Jesus Christ's life were written out, there would not be enough room in the world for the books that would document this. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said.
Yeah.
So there were events and miracles that are not recorded. I mean, John, he differs very much from the other three gospel writers. They focus on more or less a specific set of events, and they tell these from different angles, more or less. John tries to focus on a lot of material that they don't. So if you just say read Mark, you wouldn't get a lot of the sayings of Jesus, you wouldn't get some of the miracles, especially the miracles that are related in John. So, and if you just read John, you wouldn't get a lot of the miracles that came up in the other gospels. So there are miracles of Jesus that he was performing that we don't have detailed records about. Do we know what they are? Not necessarily, but we know that he was doing stuff.
I'm sure that his mother must have witnessed a few. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, moving along. No more wine. But this is on the surface practical problem.
This is what?
Practical problem.
Oh, right.
Any host who does not supply ample food and drink for celebrations dishonors himself in the community and suffers this hurt reputation. So if you have a hurt reputation, well, who's going to deal with you in the community? We don't necessarily have that as much today because we just go into a store, we buy whatever, and then we get out. But especially when businesses were more personal, if you knew that somebody, or maybe not even know, but if you had a rumor that somebody was skimming money, or maybe having dishonest ways, you would never buy from them. And because of that reputation, they would go out of business and possibly be in danger of starvation. So you needed a good reputation in the community to buy and sell goods just for basic necessities, as well as make profitable business. The same is true today somewhat, because you go to businesses you trust. You go to the nice big stores because you know that you're going to get what you're going to get, that it's passed various inspections, regulations, and you can get quality stuff from there. You wouldn't want to go to some guy selling seafood out of his truck necessarily. You might guarantee that it's fresh, but you go like, do I really know you that well? Do I really know that you just caught this morning? I don't know. But if you knew that guy, yeah, of course. But again, if you knew that guy, if you had a reputation in his community. So reputation, very important. So Jesus would be acting to save somebody's reputation, similar to how he delivers us from our dishonor by sin before the Father. And herein you have more theological but more symbolic problems, which is if the wedding feast is going on and these people don't have enough, the wedding feast of the Lamb is going on, there's not enough, then God himself would suffer hurt reputation in our midst, and we would not trust God. We would be in unbelief. So Jesus is coming into this wedding feast, kind of symbolizing his own wedding feast, the wedding of the Lamb and his bride, the church. With the Father who has given away his son, the bridegroom, the Father being the master of this mystical wedding. And Jesus is trying to uphold the reputation of his Father by making sure these guests are provided for. And he does this by purifying them. And I'm going to get into the whole purification thing when we talk about the water. But he has to make sure that we have a proper reputation with the Father, we have a proper trust, and he shows us the Father's honor, his glory among us, that we may have faith in our God. So the practical problem, just Jesus is helping out some guy in the community. Theological problem, Jesus is coming to the crucifixion to uphold God the Father's reputation here on earth. See how deep down you can go? And as we'll get into it and I'll show, the wine is representative of Christ's blood. And Jesus is making reconciliation between us and the Father by way of his own blood. Okay. I know we're getting close to time, so I'll finish with time. So my hour has not yet come. The second half of John's Gospel, which follows the raising of Lazarus. So the raising of Lazarus, that's the apex, that's the climax in the middle, kind of foreshadowing what happens to Jesus. In the second half, we see corresponding elements in the linear progression of the second half. And that's what I was talking about with, you have the first half of John's Gospel, then the second half. These are linear progressions. And then you can match the events side by side. Okay. So the appearance of Jesus as the Lamb of God, like John the Baptist, he's pointing, this is the Lamb of God. That matches the triumphal entry in the second half of the Gospel. And then shortly after the triumphant entry, you have Greeks, Gentiles inquiring of Jesus Christ. Who is this guy? What do you know? What message do you have for us? That matches in the first half of the Gospel, John chapter 1, with the disciples coming and going, oh, who are you? What message do you have for us as the Messiah? Well, part of that, when we're in the speeches of the Greek Gentile, or the speech Jesus has to the Greek Gentiles, Jesus, at that point in time in the second half of the Gospel, now declares his hour has come. This is in the triumphal entry on the way to the cross, quite noticeably so. And he also mentions this again, that his hour has come twice. Jesus personally mentions it during the Last Supper. John, as a narrator, is mentioning it at the beginning of the supper in John chapter 13. Jesus himself mentions it beginning of John chapter 17. Basically, Jesus is talking about his hour has come in the sense of the process of his death and resurrection. So his hour is not 60 minutes. His hour, or his time, is the entire 3 days or so events of the trials, the suffering, to the crucifixion, to the resurrection. That is his hour. So in this hour, as Jesus kind of articulates when he mentions it, John chapter 17, this is when the Father glorifies the Son and the Son glorifies the Father. And what I was just saying with the wedding feast, that Jesus is defending the reputation of the host, but it's symbolically pointing forward to when Jesus defends the reputation of God, his glory. So the Son glorifies the Father by him going to the cross and dying on the cross, fulfilling what the Father has ordained for the world. So Jesus on the cross is actually glorifying the Father. He is ensuring that God's reputation is maintained here upon the earth, that God has provided a way for the people here on earth to be found with him, and that they're not separated and in the distress of unbelief. Because faith fundamentally is trust. There's also knowledge, there's also the affirmation that yes, I acknowledge that God is my Lord, but faith at its heart is trust. So in order to maintain this trust, to create belief, Jesus comes so that we may know God and know his love for us at the cross. So the Son dying upon the cross is him glorifying the Father, and the Father also glorifies the Son. Jesus is most glorified when he's the most bloodied and broken. You don't necessarily think about that, but that's how he comes up in John. He's the most glorified when he is performing the Father's work in his death.
I wonder what the devil thought when Jesus was on the cross. You think the devil thought maybe he had won?
Don't know. Don't have a commentary from him. I'll also mention the term servants, John chapter 2, verse 5, where his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. The word for servant there isn't the usual word for servant that comes up in the New Testament, because the usual word for servant in the New Testament is doulos, slave. And that has different connotations. So it's not meant as like a chattel slavery like you would have in the 1800s in the US. But it's basically somebody who has a master. For this word here, you actually find a different word, which is diakonos, deacon, or better translated, minister. Somebody who administers something on behalf of someone else. It only appears in one other passage in the Gospel of John, and that passage is John 12:26, when he's talking to the Greek Gentiles, when he's talking about his hour has come. And Jesus articulates the servant as anybody who is following him. And the servants hate the world, but are honored by the Father. And then you have that honor shame language there. So the servants that are following Jesus, they're participating in the honor that God gives to the Son, because the Father is glorifying the Son in his death and resurrection. The Son is glorifying the Father. So the servants who are honored by the Father are honored according to what glory and reputation the Son has among us. So Jesus actually explicitly talks about the sharing of glory at the prayer at the Last Supper in John chapter 17. So the Father glorifies the Son, and then the Son glorifies all his servants with God's glory, so that when the Father is glorifying the servants, he's glorifying them through Christ, through his action. So yes, hours come means death, crucifixion, and Jesus bringing God's glory here on earth, and making sure that the glorious reputation of God is present among us. Okay. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. So we'll stop here today. I was hoping we could get through the whole thing. We'll finish up next week. If you have the same number of questions, we may only just get through this, but if not, I'll quickly wrap up John chapter 2. I won't go into nearly as much detail as I do with the Wedding Feast of Cana, but I'll get into Jesus cleansing the temple and how that's related to the resurrection. Quickly, I'll do it quickly. Okay. Any last questions, comments?
Think about the word servant, it's basically anybody that's serving, isn't it? I mean, we're all servants in a way. You're
The wheels are turning in my head. I would make a distinction between the two forms of servant as it appears in Scripture. Because the doulos, the slave, that's kind of the generic, yeah, we're following, we're doing what God tells us to do. We have a master in some sense. The deacons, the ministers, that type of servant, Jesus is elevating them a little bit more, because the slave is the one who just has a master, but the deacon is the one who has some sort of authority in the household and is exercising this authority within the household. Slave doesn't have authority, they just do. A deacon, a servant, has the ability to boss other people around. And they're not slaves, they don't have masters, they have a relation to somebody that they're fulfilling. It's more like a job than it is a master-servant relationship.
I was thinking about that song that the deacons used to sing about, let me be your servant.
Yeah. So yeah, when Jesus is using that word here, he's really talking about, well, if you want to glorify the Father, participate within my death. Participate within the crucifixion. So the servants are given a task to, will the crucifixion happen every time? Will the crucifixion happen without other people serving Jesus? Of course, he's going to bring that about no matter what. But the servants, they are given the task of participating in this in a very specific way. As we get into it, I'm going to explain it better next week. But basically, their job is to get baptized. That is what Jesus is telling them to do here. Baptized in his blood, specifically. So the servants are, when they are being glorified by Jesus and the Father through Jesus, when they're being glorified, it's in baptism. Again, that's next week. That's a lot more unearthing of what's in the text. I guess that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, Pastor, I didn't have to leave at 11 for a meeting because it was canceled. So I'm still here. And I was wondering if we could have a prayer for my husband, David, and for Gail, and anybody else who anyone can think of that needs.
Yeah, I have it written down. Yeah,
Thank you.
let us pray. O Lord Jesus Christ, you came in this world to save us, to show us the Father and his love for us through the cross. We thank you for all that you have done among us, that you have brought us to faith, called us through faith, through word and sacrament, that you have taken away our sins. We also thank you for the worldly things, the bodily things that you do for us. We thank you for the miracle that you did at Cana, that you protected the reputation of the host there, and for many other miracles you performed when you were walking about with the disciples, all the healings, all the feedings. We ask you, O Lord, that we receive not only things of the Spirit, but also for the body. We pray for those who are sick or injured or suffering from affliction, that you heal them, that you uplift them with the Holy Spirit, and that you guard them according to your will. We especially pray for David, that you help him with his infection, that you bring him to healing, that you give him rest and peace until this is done, and keep him in your care. We also ask you, O Lord, for Gail, that she be healed of her affliction, that you put good and faithful optometrists, ophthalmologists among her, so that she may receive the help that she needs at this time. We pray, O Lord, for these two, but we know that there are many others who need your healing and your strength. Be, O Lord, with them all. In your name, O Lord, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.